Said there were two sides to Tupac, the wonderful side and the not so wonderful. Suge Knight's influence brought out the worst. Tupac now started to wage a war against Biggie. That's Mo Premium White trying to control Tupac. Tupac was losing control.
That's my new style. Hey, have a good summer. Have a good summer, B.I. The directors, the minister decide. Let me tell the whole world. All right, tell them how you did what you had to do. These chump, punk, slump, you know what I'm saying?
You'll have a chance to come here and rebuttal.
No, they won't. They better come now. Check this out. They fired me, but did it in a roundabout punk snitch way. So I caught them on the streets and beat they behind. You know what I'm saying?
Okay,
I was a menace to these brothers. And it ain't over. I still got more than chump because I read what you said about. Don't jump to the TV. Kick that to the TV. Kick that to the TV. Where?
The thing around his head, scarf around his head.
No.
In the back.
What up? This is your boy Cass with Taboo Topics, your host of Taboo Topics. So with everything going on right now with this Tupac case, it inspired me to go ahead and do this video. I've been plotting to do this video for quite a while now. As many of us know, this case, was, getting ready to take off or whatnot, and that we knew it was coming. And I thought, I'd say, now's the perfect time. I'm inspired. Let me put it together, and we'll talk about it a little bit. So as you can see, what I titled this as, was Tupac Shakur bipolar? Was he narcissistic? Right. I have had this discussion for quite a few years, and I've talked to different people about it. And I finally began to see over the years that some of the people that knew him somewhat admitted to it. They may just not have necessarily said it directly. Right. If we're talking about narcissistic personality disorder, if we talk about, bipolarism, if we talk about this new one, for example, that I found online, it's called, I want to make sure I get it right. I'm looking at my laptop, NDP or narcissistic. Well, no, that's not it. IDE is what they call it. IDE, intermittent explosive disorder. And that sounds a whole lot more like Tupac during his life here on earth. Here's the thing about that, right? Obviously I'm going to be criticized for making these statements, right? Because there's a lot of diehard Tupac fans out there, right? I am too. I won't call myself necessarily a diehard fan, but I had become a fan of him over the years. I am old enough to remember when he was alive. I was a kid running around at the time, and, I followed him for a few years, around that time. So I can remember, some of the things that were going on. Right. But if I'm given a little bit more substance about the topic at hand, right? Because obviously it could come across as my opinion. I'm not a physician, and I'm not trying to diagnose the man. This is not meant to slander him, anything like that. But again, to you fans, this is just my take on it. And me being a fan, I've lived a lot of life. I've experienced a lot of different people and personalities in my years. And I've seen that these things are very much so real, right? When I was coming up, obviously I'm a little bit younger than Tupac, but our generations are somewhat similar, in how we came up. Mental illness was frowned upon. It was not something that was talked about. If we were showing out or acting up or acting or getting in our own way or whatever, the adults would say we're just showing out. They're just having a tantrum. They're just having a moment. They would put us on punishment or discipline us and say, just, you go sleep it off. It was frowned upon. It wasn't talked about. But years later now, with advances and mental health and things like that, they have diagnosed a lot of these things, and I would like to, be transparent. I believe that Mr. Shakur had some of these things, especially the IED option, right? A matter of fact, like I said, so intentionally, I put these things up on Google. So it doesn't come across like these are just my personal opinions, You know what I'm saying? Because again, I'm not a doctor or physician, anything like that. I'm just stating how I feel. And I figure if I pull up on Google, you guys can do the same. So it doesn't seem like I'm just pulling it out of thin air, right? So don't be mad at me. I'm just speaking my truth. You know what I'm saying? So for example, let me go over this. So intermittent explosive disorder, right? It says is a mental health condition defined by sudden, short bursts of extreme anger, aggression, or verbal and physical violence. Let's see. So these angry actions are much bigger than the trigger. Outbursts usually last under 30 minutes and happen without a plan. Right now, you might think about Tupac and say, well, he was never frustrated for no reason. He always had a reason. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I don't fully agree with the 30-minute thing because we know that Tupac would cut somebody off and be done with them. And that would be it. You know what I'm saying? Like, narcissistic personality disorder, right? So let's go over that. Narcissistic personality traits and narcissistic personality disorder are deeply linked to adverse childhood experiences rather than being born out of excessive self-love. Clinical perspectives and trauma experts like those discussed view pathological narcissism as a defensive survival suite crafted to mask profound shame and emotional injury. Now, the emotional injury of that, Tupac definitely suffered from emotional injury, right? We know about from the media and from some family and friends over the years speaking about it that he dealt with a lot of trauma. Now, I'm not saying that he is full-blown narcissistic or he was full-blown bipolar. I think he had traits, right? And I think those traits stemmed from traumatic experiences that he experienced as a child, right? Touching on it a little bit, for example, somewhat it started when his mom was in prison. You might say, well, that didn't necessarily directly affect Tupac, but to some degree it kind of did, right? Because that was very unhealthy for the mother. And the child can experience whatever the mother experiences. Now, if we fast forward a little bit to when Tupac turned at least 1 year old, a 1-year-old child can be greatly affected by his or her surroundings. You know what I mean? And in his mom's situation, she dealt with a lot. Well, no, let's go a little further than that, right? She was in the movement, the Black Panther Party, and there's a lot of racial discrimination and injustice going on around that. And she was involved in a lot of that. She ended up on drugs at some point, which escalated later in her life. As Tupac began to grow, he talked about a little bit in his music. They would go hungry. They would move from house to house. They didn't understand what Christmas was like. Tupac, he didn't have a solid father figure. His sister, Setua, right? His half sister, her father was a stepfather to him, but he ended up going to jail. And again, he was in the movement, so he wasn't really present as much as would have, in terms of need that Tupac could have benefited from, right? We talked about, his mother talked about Legs in one of her interviews where Legs was a father figure to Tupac, but Legs was also not very present. He ended up getting killed later. And you can hear Tupac talking about his father getting killed at some point because he thought the Legs was his father. Then we go into Billy Garland, right? And we talk about Billy not being present in his life until later. But I'm going to get back into Billy a little bit later into this, this story that I'm talking about here, right? So I believe that Tupac was affected in a way where his trauma from his upbringing created these things in him. I believe that can happen because, like I said, I've dealt with these things in my life. I've dealt with people who are narcissistic, who are bipolar on multiple levels. And I've seen how, they are with life and how those around them, are affected by it, right? So there's these stories out there of when Tupac was 18, 19 years old, he was out there struggling. And some of the friends that he grew up with, they talk about how his personality and how he was and, the different traits he had at those ages and the struggles that he went through. And I want you guys to check out these clips that I put together and we'll go over them afterwards.
Pac comes running up to me and he's like, bro, come on, we gotta go fight. And I was like, fight who? And he's like, we gotta go fight these niggas, right? And I'm like, what niggas? And he's over there, they was talking. I was like, what happened? He was like, they talking shit about my chains. You know, I used to wear these silver chains. And I was just like, how many of them is it? And he was like, it's like 10 of them. And I'm like, bro, you want to go fight 10 dudes in Memphis? 10 Memphis dudes in Memphis. And once again, this is before Juice, for anybody that don't believe me. The movie Juice, the script was actually given to me to audition for Steel, the role of Steel in Juice, right? But I knew that Tupac had acting experience. So I asked him to help me, practice or rehearse or get ready for the script. As we're reading the script, I'm reading the Bishop parts, and I'm like, yo, this dude reminds me of you. You know, we all were saying that. So he was already, the reason that he even came to even audition for it, because that character reminded us so much of him. As I'm reading it, I was like, bro, this is you. You know what I mean? You could go out for this. And then Atron, who was our manager at the time, he thought so as well. And through Atron and I believe it was Kara Lewis with William Morris Agency, who set up the whole thing originally. You know, they made some calls and they were able to get him the audition for the movie, not because he got the role and then started acting like this character. The reason that we even suggested that he audition is because there was this character that reminded of us so much of him, of how he already was, right? So, you know, I from my experience, I like to say that, you know, Pac actually calmed down after Juice. He was wilder than that before, you know, because as he sort of got a little bit of fame and, you know, as you get older, you mature just slightly, even though we're still all still, you know, 21, 22, 23, however old we were when he shot that. You know, when I met him at 18 or 19, you know, when he was 21, 22, he was a little bit wiser, a little bit more controlled. He was learning how to deal with fame. That still didn't make him calm. He was still a wild dude. But I'm saying I knew an even wilder Tupac than before Juice. And that's just from my experience.
You know, Pac almost got us killed in Richmond, Virginia. I know them brothers remember that time they backed us out of this club, this after hours place in Richmond, Virginia, 4 a.m. This one cat claimed Pac stepped on a shoe and they got into a little spat, and then it was like, I'm gonna see who got the juice, and said something disrespectful to Pac, and Pac started cursing him out. This whole club turned against us, all black, all ghetto. After hours lounge. 10 minutes later, we're taking pictures and everybody's walking us around. We're all spread out. It was 4 of us there. Me, Pac, Money B, and Sophia. And Pac challenged this cat and it got ugly, and then Pac was like, yo, man, shot. We out. Yo, we got beef. We didn't even know what was going on until we walked over there. So we all got next to Pac and they were backing us out of the club. Then they backed us out against the brick wall. And at the point that I was grabbing, holding Pac, trying to get him to shut up, still putting him in the cab, he was still challenging. It was like 40 or 50 cats that we were gonna have to fight at one point, because they were starting to build up out of the clock behind, you know. Fuck them California niggas. Yo, T-Roy, I got you, cat. Yeah, that's you, Mike? Yeah, that's me. What? We'll send him back to Cali, right? And then more and more were ganging up. And Pac was like, what? How y'all gonna do that to me? I'm not scared of none of y'all. I'm not scared of none of y'all. Sophia was the muscle cat, though. And he said, look, why do we gotta fight all of y'all? Just me and you box right now. And he challenged the main cat who was challenging Pac, while I smushed Pac into the cab, because the more Pac talked, the madder they got. It was a no-win situation. And I was like, Pac, I'm a soldier too. There's 40 of them. And we're from California and there's 4 of us. And we're not strapped. We couldn't bring no guns to the club or nothing. That was the beginning of a big feud between Saafir and Tupac, because as soon as we got back to the hotel, Pac got on the phone. That was one of those outings I told you about when he would just pop up and do a few shows with us. As soon as he got to a phone, he called up First thing he did was went upstairs to our bodyguards and DJ Fuse and all the people who had guns, like, Fuse, I need your gun, let me borrow your gun. Yo, we need your gun, we going back, and we gonna show them niggas that they can't raise us up like that. You know? What do you mean, who got the juice? I'm gonna show them who got the juice. So our bodyguard was like, all right, who else need one? Where they at? We were like, they're at a club 30 minutes away. And then Zazie looked at me and said, Greg, I told you not to wake me up with this bullshit, okay? There's no threat right now at the hotel. Took the guns back and went to sleep.
House now, fuck everybody. The opening movie Juice, he had a pajama party in Frisco. In his first movie, oh man, he was so excited, you know what I'm saying? He called my house, Troy, man. I know you coming, you know, you, Kendrick, and your boys, you know what I'm saying? So we rented a limo, and he had a limo, we was behind his limo, we in Frisco, and we parlaying, we having a good time. And after the thing was over, they had an after party in Oakland. So he said, yeah, man, y'all limo follow our limo. And he was kicking half the people out, you know what I'm saying? This is my favorite incident, my boy. He said, okay, these niggas here, I want you to make sure they in, you know what I'm saying? Give them a little pass and everything, you know what I'm saying? He treated like king, and that's why I have to say that was my favorite incident, that he didn't leave us out. Even though he did, you know, kind of shied away from the jungle after that little incident down here happened. He never forgot about his real boys, you know what I'm saying? I'll give him that. And we were following them, and a car, they shot up our limo. Somebody drove by in a car, and my brother was up in, remember that? Yeah, I remember. Yeah, my brother was up in, sticking out his head off the limo, and they said something, and we don't know if they was after Pac or after us, you know, it was just like 3 limos, and we were following their limo. They just came and just blasted our limo, and bullet holes all through the car doors and shit. One bullet went through my partner. Yeah, went through my partner's legs and hit the radio, and I'm right here on the door, and if it would have went through it, it shot me straight in the ass.
The complaint was over negative comments Tupac made concerning the residents of Marin. The conflict came to a head at the annual Marin City Festival, which Tupac attended as a guest. The end result was a 6-year-old child being fatally shot.
A few weeks before the incident took place, me and Tupac was backstage in the Richmond Auditorium here. He was performing there that night. And it was me, my brother Charles Jr., and my cousin Brian Tyne. So as we got to talking and shit, we brought up the festival because it was time for the festival to come around. And we had told Pac the festival was going to take place, you know. Maybe he ought to come over and, you know, holler at us or something like that. So we left there and headed on back to Marin City. Then a few weeks, when the festival came about, he came. He was actually there. The girl Layla, she had came up to me and she said, are you still cool with Tupac? I'm like, yeah, that's my dog. We still cool, ain't no problem. Because there was some type of controversy. He had supposed to said something about the people here in Marin City. So so she said it was cool. You know, I told her it was cool. And at that time, 5150 was on the stage, you know, and they had just got off the stage. And my brother Charles Jr. came and said, you know Pac here, don't you? You know what I'm saying? Let's go holler at Pac. I was like, okay, in a minute. I was with my kids, and we enjoying the show and shit. So I walk over there, and Pac with Man and a few bodyguards and shit like that, Maurice Harding. And I walk up to him, and I'm like, man, what's happening? How you doing, Pac? He like, what's up? Where you been, boy? I've been looking for you all over the place. So we get to talking and shit. We cutting it up, you know, trying to establish the next time we're going to meet or something like that, right? And this guy walked over, and he like, man, what's up? And he was walking up on Pac like he was ready to hit him, right? And Man stepped up in front of him like, man, you know what I'm saying? What's up? You got a problem with something? You know, like, you know, bodyguarding Pac and shit like that. Like, nah, ain't no problem. Dude say it ain't no problem. So he walk off, right? And Demetrius come over, you know, and he like, man, you know you're not supposed to be around here, you know. And he fire on Pac. Boom. He hit him, and then all kind of commotion start jumping off. You know, like when it's a fight, everybody come to, you know, see what's going on. And when that commotion jumped off, it was a backpack that was handed around. You know, these little kids that came with Pac, it was about 6 little kids, you know. And they had a little backpack, and that's where the gun came out of. So they got the gun out the pack and shit like that. Some people say Pac got the gun, but I never seen the gun in Pac's hand. I seen it in Maurice's hand. So Maurice was over here at this time. When the commotion broke off, somehow he had ended up over here. And it's like people running around frantic and shit like that, you know. No, at first they looking at the fighting incident. So when Maurice got the gun, that's when people went into a panic. And he cocked the gun, and he tried to shoot, the gun jammed. And he cocked it again. I'm looking at him the whole time. He cocked it again, tried to shoot, nothing happened. Then like on his third time cocking it, he shot, and boom, that was it. Everybody started screaming and yelling and running, and I turned around and I ran and dove. After the shots was fired and shit, you know, when I didn't hear no more shots, I raised my head up, you know what I'm saying, to see what was going on. And then it was people already in pursuit of him. You know, they was already chasing him and Harding, and the little kids had went a different way. You understand what I'm saying? And it was Harding and Tupac that ran the same way. So what they did, they ran here and they jumped over this fence. You know, even at that time, Pac being my friend, I had to make a decision, you know what I'm saying? I mean, somebody shot, you know what I'm saying? He's shooting around and all my family down here, my kids and shit. I'm like, you know, I felt like, you know, fucking him up or something. So I grabbed a big ass rock and I ran behind Michael Gibson and Harding, right? I'm finna just hit the car, break the window or something so we can, so he wreck or something so we can get in that ass or something, right? But when I went over there and I got over the fence, Michael Gibson was already there. And he in the car, he just putting them on Pop. He just throwing, you know what I'm saying? He just putting them on him, right? While the police and everybody is around. I'm like, well, goddamn, I don't got to do shit. There it is, you know what I'm saying? So I step back and somehow Pop get him out of the car. And I think Maurice is driving at this time. It's like people trying to just turn the whole fucking car over and shit like that. He was in a Cherokee, actually a Cherokee Jeep. So they're going to just run people over, you know what I'm saying, getting the fuck up out of there. He continued up this street right here, you know. You got about 200 mad motherfuckers, you know, running behind him. He wasn't driving fast or nothing like that. I think he wanted to turn into the police station right there. But for some reason, he stopped like about right here for some reason and just stopped. But I think he got out because the police presence was known. But at the same time, you got 250 motherfuckers mad. They already destroying the truck. They hitting the truck with bottles and bricks. I mean, you should see that car after they finished with it. They fucked the car up so bad. But let's see. When I came around, the police was standing with their shotguns. They was trying to, you know, people to calm down and shit like that. They was hitting Pac so hard with rocks and bottles that he climbed up under the front end of the police car. He was literally up on the ground up under the car. You understand what I'm saying? And the police couldn't do nothing to stop it from happening. So they finally was able to calm people down and disperse people, you know, as more police units came and shit like that. They was finally able to get the crowd calmed down. So they took him, and instead of taking him to the substation right here, they took him around to Sausalito, to the substation of Sausalito, which was a probably smart decision because you would have had 1,000 people out there, you know, not gonna wait until Tupac came out, you know, wouldn't have been able to get him out of there, and that's pretty much was it.
Although not directly involved, the Marin City shooting was first in a long line of troubles that Tupac faced. As his fame grew, so did his legal troubles all across the country. Charges ranging from assault to the shooting of 2 off-duty police officers splashed across headlines, making Tupac Shakur the most famous rapper in America. But his most serious charge was one of rape, an accusation that Tupac always denied.
So, as you can see, you know, they had a lot to say about his personality. You know, they talk about how, well, one of the main things that they have in common, and a lot of them haven't had in common, is that how he didn't listen. And how he was quick to anger if something didn't make sense to him. You know, how he was always in the middle of an argument, you know, which is a trait. Because it's not to say that Tupac was a troublemaker per se, but it's to say that people didn't understand him and he questioned everything. Now, if you guys know anybody that has dealt with a narcissistic person or a person with bipolar disorder, even if it's just a trait, it can be difficult. Because you're trying to get them to listen for the best of their interest, and then you end up irritated because they're not listening. And then you realize you're trying to force a person to listen to you when it's your opinion and not theirs, and it makes you upset, then it makes them upset, and now you get what I'm saying? And it can be a very hard situation. You know, a lot of them, they had in common was that he would just spaz. And he would go from 0 to 60 because something didn't make sense to him, right? I talked about, well, that no one could get through to him, right? There's a interview out there somewhere. I tried to find this interview. It's been a lot of years since I've seen it, but Big Psych was in this interview, and he talked about trying to reach Tupac's spirit. He was trying to get him to understand that everybody not your friend, and that everyone does not deserve loyalty, because not everyone knows how to return, give that in return. And he said he just couldn't get him to listen. He said that his light was so bright and that he just really believed that he could have an impact on everyone he came in contact with. He just didn't understand. Like, for example, we talked about his trauma and the PTSD that I believe he suffered from, which created these personality and mental health disorders, right? Just touching on a few of them. In Marin City, which what some of that video talked about, where he struggled at, that he created some issues and he was no longer welcomed in the city, but he would still show up. He just really still believed that they would accept him no matter what. And he showed up to that park. And even though Tupac wasn't directly the blame for it, he was still linked to it, that 6-year-old getting killed. And they blamed Tupac for that. You get what I'm saying? He could not see that. For some reason, his mind wouldn't allow him to see that he was considered the problem. He just didn't want to believe it. That's the narcissism we talked about, where a narcissistic trait is someone who only can see it one way, or for the most part, they're only so willing to see it both ways, depending on the mood or the setting, right? Like, for example, let me say this. I'm going to deviate just for a second, right? Back in 1996, I can remember when Hit 'Em Up came out. And I can remember listening to that song for the first time. I want to say this was July or August of 96, somewhere in that ballpark. Now, again, I had been watching Tupac for a few years, so I'd seen all the trouble he was getting into, right? He had been in jail already, had been through that situation. And I got to the end of Hit 'Em Up, and I could hear him make those statements about the kids, killing kids. Now, it was a metaphor, obviously. It was considered battle rap, obviously, in hip hop. But a lot of us felt like it was too much. Now, I didn't like Hit 'Em Up. Not because I didn't like the content per se. I just wasn't a fan of the song. It wasn't my taste per se. To this day, I still don't think it was the best battle rap song ever came out. A lot of people feel that way. I personally like Nas. I think Nas Ether was probably the best, but that's my opinion, right? But when I heard that, I said, and I regret that. It's crazy because I can remember saying this. I can remember saying when I heard him say, "My fofo, make sure all your kids don't grow." And I can remember saying, they're going to kill him. And then I heard myself say it. I took a step back. I was like, wow, if he doesn't calm down, I said, there's certain lines you don't cross. You just can't do that. Because now, again, I was a kid running in the streets, right? I had all kind of friends. I was into all kind of different things. Some of the worst type of trouble. I was a kid, but I was still somewhat of a street dude, and I understood retaliation. And I understood that when you cross a certain line, people want retaliation, and sometimes music isn't the way. So I was thinking from that mindset that he's putting himself in a position where they're going to want to take his life. And you could hear it in Tupac's voice that he really didn't care. And my thing was, does he know how important he is? Does he understand that people rely on him? That people, he's like I heard his Aunt Gloria say that he was the blessing that came to them. They had never known a life like that before him. And he came along and he blessed the family. Like, people really depended on him. And I remember thinking, I'm not happy that I said I wasn't wishing death on him, but I remember saying that like I predicted it without understanding what I was saying, because I was honestly frustrated with him. because I had been watching him for, a few years, and the mistakes he was making, the trouble he was getting into. And I'm like, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. I'm like, this something going to happen to him. I remember I turned the music off and I shook my head and I walked out of the house at the time, and I kind of left it at that. Now, fast forward, let's see, September, he got shot in September. And then the news came across all the radio stations, all media present at the time, that Tupac Shakur gets shot in Las Vegas. I said, whoa. I said, he got shot. Somebody shot him. Now, a lot of people around him, friends, family, even just some of us fans out there, was not myself per se, were saying that, oh, he's still alive, he'll probably pull through it. But I wasn't so optimistic. Now, again, it sounds like I'm hating, but I really wasn't. I just understood the street life, and I understood life being delicate. At the young age that I was, I understood that. But fast forward, throughout the week, it was being reported that he was getting better, and I began to feel a little bit better about it. But then at that point, we had heard how serious the injuries were, and it would be life altering. And I remember thinking, okay, well, maybe he will pull through. And then that September came around, and they reported he had died. And I was really like, whoa, he died. It happened. What I said would happen to him happened to him. To this day, I feel so bad horrible about that. The fact that I even said it, it still bothers me to this day when I think about it. I didn't even know the guy, like we all feel like we know somebody through the music, but I didn't know Tupac Shakur, and I remember saying that because I had seen that. I had been in the streets. I had seen it, and I knew what that was like. Just to kind of touch on this a little bit, right? Because I'm jumping topics, but I'm going to come back to it, right? The shooting in Las Vegas. It really bothers me that so many people want to make that bigger than what it is. Let me just say this. Tupac Shakur died gang banging. Simple as that. There was no large conspiracy. There's Suge Knight didn't do it, because you're not going to sit me next to the victim and me tell you that I think you're such a great marksman that you'll miss me and take this person out. I don't buy that. I'm not one of them people. Right. But my thing is, me being in the streets at a point in time and dealing with the type of people I was dealing with at that time in my life. Now I'm a Christian now. Just to put that out there. I'm saved. I don't glorify none of that stuff. This is just conversation, right? For the sake of the conversation and explaining where I'm going with this, right? I can remember being in a situation, and I can remember my first thought was retaliation tonight, because it happened to me that night, and I wasn't willing to wait. I wasn't willing to let the guys have any time to celebrate what had happened. I was ready to load up, which we were pretty much on the verge of doing, and go and handle that situation. Now, thank God I can tell you that it didn't transpire. I believe God saved me from that situation, but it could have went left. But at the time, I was angry. I wasn't willing to wait. I wasn't willing to pull it off. It was like, no, retaliation is is the only answer right now. Orlando Anderson, I question whether or not it was him, but between him and Big Dre, but one of the two. But Orlando was the one that got jumped on, as we could see in the videos, right? My thing is, him being who he was and being reported as who he was from those that knew him, as well as others in the streets at the time, that he was the type of dude that he was. You cannot convince me that he was going to be willing to go back to his home city and let it blow over. That he was just going to go home and feel like I let a rapper jump on me and do this to me. He wasn't going to wait. Take this from somebody that used to be in the street and understands retaliation. It's much more simple than that. Tupac being who he was, a great figure, it makes it hard for people to believe that he was a human being. He was still a human being, and he had issues like we all do. I think that he was a little narcissistic, and I think it was a little bipolar, and I think that caused him to make bad decisions that also ultimately cost him his life. Reggie Wright, I've heard Reggie Wright say this on Bomb First over there. You know, he says that it was ordained for Tupac to die that day. He may have died in a different way. And I must admit, I agree with Reggie on that. Even if he died in a different facet, it was going to still happen when it happened, you know. So we talked about Juice. Well, people across the, you know, the Tupac spectrum talks about Bishop and Juice, how Tupac became Bishop, and what's the guy? What was it? Birdie from Above the Rim. That he became those people. But as we talked about that video, how his friends and talked about he was already that person, right? Money B can be heard in an interview saying on YouTube, he calmed down by the time he got to Digital Underground. He was worse than that. Money B can also be heard saying, which is very similar to what I said. Money B said he can be successful, he can become a politician in his lifetime if he can live long enough. And when I heard Money B say that years later, I thought it resonated. I was like, wow, I said the same thing. And he didn't make it, you know. But people were saying he was already, his personality was already that way. Do I think he was super intelligent and bright? I think he was super intelligent and bright. I think he would have been a shining star. I think he would have been the next Denzel Washington before Denzel. For example, he had movies like, obviously, like Bullet. Tupac had movies like Poetic Justice, which was a big movie, but it wasn't a breakout film. Above the Rim, which was my favorite movie that Tupac starred in by, but Independence Day, he was slated to do Independence Day. That would have been his breakout movie because that was a major box office hit. And I think that would have catapulted him to a whole nother level, right? There's audio out there that I just came across this. I didn't know this audio existed until yesterday, that Tupac says in this audio that, I've said this on other interviews, that I'm willing, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, I'm willing to squash this beef with Biggie if we can put together community organizations or benefit style programs for the communities, whether it involve music or outreach programs or whatever for the youth.
I already said this. I said this in the gang of interviews. If some large corporation or if the world really wanted to see us come together, my offer is put a community center in every ghetto in the United States of America, fully funded, fully taken care of, and I'll tour every one of those community centers with Biggie and kiss him on his cheek and rap whatever they want me to rap. But until they do that, the war is on.
There you go. That's Tupac.
Which tells me that he was coming around, right? In another video, Idi Amin and Napoleon can be heard saying that he had mentioned to them that he was done with beefing with Biggie. He was over that. Now, in my personal opinion, I think that maybe he had gotten tired of Biggie not responding. I mean, it's kind of hard to fight a battle where you're fighting by yourself. He probably just gotten tired of it. But if I'm giving him, but I got to give him a little bit grace too. He probably was maturing. Now you have people across the mental state or the mental health state or the medical field. That's, they say that the brain doesn't develop until you're 25, right? Now, for the longest time, I heard that, but only as of recent, over the past 10 years, I don't fully agree with that. In my opinion, what I believe is the brain probably stops developing or fully develops at 25, but a person doesn't truly know who they are until about the age of 30. They don't really figure themselves out or who they are or what they are until about 30, because at that age, they have a chance to look back on their life, the mistakes they made, good, bad decisions, or indifferent, and they're able, and they can see where they feel they should be or should have been and react based on that, right? So I do think he was maturing. We talked about him being the next Denzel, all these different things, that he could have become. Politician, absolutely, but he would have had to come to grips with these mental health things that I believe he suffered from, that I don't believe he was aware of, nor would have been willing to accept at that point in his life. You know, he was such a loose cannon, you know. Again, I talked about, I believe it probably developed over time from all the stuff that he had been through, right? For example, we know, well, not sure how many people know this, but again, he had taken that major assault for jaywalking on the East Coast, where the police really put a whooping on him. If some of you guys know this story, you saw the pictures, you saw how bad they did. You know, they really put a whooping on him. You know, we talked about him being homeless. The videos that we saw with him in Marin City, we talked about the 6-year-old kid that he was blamed for being killed. We talked about the rape case. We talked about the time that he spent in jail. You know, we talked about him not having a father present, his mother on drugs, right? We talked about how the media just totally dissected his character without ever meeting him a day in his life. And then he gets shot in New York. And that's that. And I've done quite a bit of research on this man over the years. He got shot in New York, but he had been shot at quite a few times before that. That's a lot of trauma. And you talking about PTSD? The Outlaws talked about he couldn't sleep. He would have these nightmares. You know, I totally understand that, because even myself to this day, from some of my trauma and being out doing the things I'm not too proud of, some of that in relation to I have nightmares. So I kind of understand that to some degree. It's some of the worst thing in the world, you know, when you can't rest because your dreams won't let you sometimes. But imagine that. So I think he developed these things because of all the trauma. You know, his mom encouraged him. He said that she encouraged me to always speak what's in my heart, to be real no matter what. Now, I don't think that's always smart. That's my opinion. Again, I've lived a lot of life though, and I've seen what just being outspoken can do. I used to be like that, and it put me in some pretty dire situations that by the grace of God, I'm still here, because I probably shouldn't be based on some of the decisions I made thinking that way. Again, not going to go into his age because that's another thing. Because again, my topic at hand is narcissism and bipolarism. And in this case, we talked about the compulsive disorder. I think he was very compulsive. You know, I think that's what got him into a lot of situations that he's in. Now, moving on a little bit. Well, let me say this. Have you guys noticed, those of you that really are fans and paid attention to his music and his life to this, you know, this point, right? Did you notice that in his early music, he talked a lot about not having a father, or a father not being present, right? He calls the unpresent father a coward, whoever that may have been, right? But on the album Machiavelli, and we know by this time Billy Garden was present in his life, his biological father, he starts to talk about how does it go? Because I'm a Christian now, I don't like to give this particular song much attention because I don't fully agree with the title of the song, period, if I'm being honest. But he says, gosh, what did he say? My father, my family tree consists of drug dealers, thugs, and killers. Something about what his father told him, though. If you guys know the song, you know what I'm talking about. Something about what his father told him. All of a sudden, he has a father. All of a sudden, it's not about the coward wasn't there anymore. You see how he shifted? He was a very impatient man. He would absorb the energy in the moment, and then he would move on to the next. He had no patience. No patience. You know, we talked about the narcissism, how disruptive that can be in friendships and relationships, and how he would absorb what he needed from one person to the next person to move on to the next. He could never maintain relationships or friendships. There was always a new group. And you notice at the end of his life, he said, now I only trust friends, and everybody with me is friends and family. But if you really know the story, that wasn't true. He was still surrounding himself with people he barely knew. In that casino, when he got jumped, most of them, he had only known the people he was with that night for 8-9 months. He barely knew them. He was still making those same mistakes, you know. So bear with me, John. I'm making sure I cover all my topics so I can get to the right get to the point that I'm trying to make here. So we talked about him maturing, right? I wanted to touch on Snoop a little bit because I really agree with this, because I talked about Hit 'Em Up, right? And Snoop getting a lot of slack, or flack, I should say, a lot of flack, because he's rewriting history. Now, I do think Snoop is doing that, but Snoop made some statements that I totally agree with. He said the problem with Hit 'Em Up was that it was drawing too much unnecessary attention. Snoop had just beat a murder case. Snoop ain't want no parts of anything that would have got him locked up. The fact that he understood that, and Snoop said, he said flat out, he said, I didn't like it. He said, I didn't like it. He said, you buying problems. I totally agree with that. And I even though we are like really riding Snoop for that, pause. You know what I'm saying? Like we are like really giving him flack for speaking on Tupac and the things that happen around Tupac. That's one of the points that I'm making. He's speaking to that point about the compulsive disorder. Even when the situation in the casino happened that night, it was a compulsive situation. It was related to Tupac, but it really wasn't related to Tupac. The story is that there was a whisper to Suge Knight and his homeboys. Tupac wasn't even in the group. He just so happened to walk over and overheard and took off and handled it on his own, and nobody could catch him. That's what I mean about the narcissism. It's my way or no way. I see what I see. I'm gonna do what I'm going to do because this is what I believe is meant to be. He didn't consider. The impatientness I talked about, right? But no, I think Snoop spoke to that, and the problem with people disowning Snoop the way they are, that people might not be too willing to accept that or hear that. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, fast forward into Keff D. So this case is going on, right? Do I think Keff D is going to jail? Absolutely. I think Keff D is definitely over with for him. You know what I'm saying? I think his defense is a horrible defense because he's telling the courts and the rest of the world that I wasn't even in Vegas, that I didn't do anything wrong, that y'all have no proof. Here's the thing. I don't know how much you guys are familiar with Greg Kading and the task force, but that $400 million lawsuit that Miss Wallace put against California, or the city of LA, Los Angeles, was the reasoning for that task force being formed. It wasn't just Greg Kading. It was Greg Kading with a joint venture of law enforcement across different institutions in law enforcement. Some of it was federal, some of it was local, some of it was on a state level. They weren't investigating Tupac. They were solely investigating the Biggie Smalls killing because of that lawsuit. Regardless of what else you guys hear that's out there, right? So here's my thing. You wasn't there, you made it up, right? Okay. You did it for the money. Well, when you gave that confession to Greg Kading in 2008, there was no money being paid out. So Greg Kading had in his task force was going to arrest Keff D, his family, his immediate family members and friends, that ran in the drug business with him on PCP charges or drug trafficking charges. And they made it quite clear that they had the whole case laid out in front of them. Unless you tell us something that we need to know about this Biggie Smalls murder case so we can do what we need to do as in law enforcement. And Keefe was adamant that he had nothing to do with that, right? But what he did say, he volunteered the Shakur information because very few people knew that Keefe had any involvement with that, in the street, let alone law enforcement. But Orlando's name had been out there since it happened, right? So you did it for the money, but there was no money involved, and then you volunteered the information. Plus, the other thing is, he had details that only those that were present would have known. Like, for example, this wasn't out there for this wasn't released by law enforcement. And to my understanding, it was somewhat kept a secret within the death row camp. But there was a shootout between both cars after they shot up the car that Tupac and Suge was in. You only a few people knew that. The young ladies that Tupac was talking to, in Keff D's confession, he mentioned that those girls were there. Again, how do you know these things if you weren't present? Now it's being said that he's been caught on a jail call stating that he did write that book because he claimed he didn't write the book, that his attorney put him up to that. I mean, it's all crazy. At this point, even without physical evidence, you confess, and the confessions hold a lot of water, especially when you've been out there taunting law enforcement and you're making money off a book and interviews and stuff like that. I mean, you can't come with a defense that you just weren't there. You didn't do it with all the evidence that's out there. It's just not going to stick. So do I think he's going to jail? Absolutely. Do I really care at this point? Not as much as I did, because if I'm being totally honest, I'm still, after all these years, a little frustrated with Tupac, because again, I saw the progression of the trouble he was getting himself into and the decision he was making. And this is just me on the outside, not knowing him personally, but following him like everyone else. I think if it was meant for him to live a little bit longer, he could have avoided some of these situations. Now, I'm not saying that like Keff should get away with it, because you commit the crime, you should do the time, especially murder. I'm sorry. I'm a forgiving person, and I think people should be forgiven, but at the same time, it's murder. And I heard someone say the other day, you weren't concerned about Tupac's family when you wrote these books. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I think he's going down. I think he put himself in this situation. There's no way out of it now. And the case is going to continue to play out till it's over with. And we're just going to see how it ends up going. You know what I'm saying? One last thing. So, Tupac's Aunt Gloria, right? She, there is an interview out there somewhere. I've heard it somewhere. I have searched high and low for it all over the internet, all over YouTube, and I cannot find it, but I swear I heard this, that his Aunt Gloria said that Tupac was given a prophecy that he would die young. Now, I'm a little, cautious on that, because again, I'm a Christian. I'm very cautious on what I listen to when it comes to things outside of my Christian faith, because the person that she mentioned told him this, or told the family that. She didn't explain in this interview that whether he was a God-fearing man or if he was of some other religion. But I've wondered, and if any of you guys have seen that interview, if you can send me the link, so I had plans for it, and I'm just curious as well. But I've also wondered, is that the reason why Tupac was talked about death so much? Is that why he had these conversations with people about dying young? Now, if I'm giving my full opinion about that, I don't think so, really. If I'm being honest, I don't really think that's it. I just think it was metaphorically cool to him to talk about death all the time, because it's not something people talked about. And I also believe it was something he was dealing with internally because he was stressed out, or whatnot. Even that real quick, if I can touch on that again, just for a second. There's an interview out there with Napoleon where Napoleon said, I think it was might have been on Art of Dialogue. Shout out to Art over there. You're doing great work over there. But I believe it was Art of Dialogue though. But Napoleon said that during the last days that they were around each other, that he mentioned to him that your spirit seems like uneasy to me, like troubled. And Tupac told him, he said, I used to want to die. At life, I didn't care. He said, but now that I'm successful and things are looking out for me, like I want to live my life now. And that Tupac was making that transition. We were talking about him maturing later. And I know I said earlier, I was talking about how Edie had mentioned that he was done with that beef with Biggie. And I think but this was all around the same time. But, the thing about that is, had he already done too much at that point in his life and made too many mistakes, granted that what happened in Vegas, I think was just, again, a circumstance, a situation that happened in the moment, and it cost him his life. But I wonder about that. But like I said, I'm just curious. Going back to the original topic I was just talking about, I'm just curious if you guys have heard that or seen that interview, anything like that. Send it to me, and I would like to really build on that, because I've been so interested in that for so long, and I just have not been able to find it. But anyway, we're gonna cut this short right here. I appreciate you guys for spending the time with me. Again, don't shoot the messenger. This is just my take on it, my feelings on how I feel about it. Do I think Tupac was narcissistic? A little bit. Do I think he was bipolar? Yes, a little bit. Do I think that is in large part what got him killed? Yes, I do. Do I think it was all his fault? I don't. Do I believe that he was born this way? I do not. I do believe it was part hormonal and majorly trauma and PTSD throughout his life. That's my take on it. Take that with what you will, and what I'm saying, and we go from there. This is your boy with Taboo Topics. Like I said, let me know what you guys think, and we go from there. Appreciate it. Peace.
Yeah.